Welcome, listeners, to Through the Sightglass, a podcast that dives deep into the fascinating world of craft beer and celebrates the incredible individuals who shape its vibrant landscape. Join us on a journey where we explore the nuances of this amazing industry and the remarkable people who contribute to its richness and diversity. Today, we're sitting down with Jesse of San Juan Island Brewery. Jesse, thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
So, we like to start off every podcast with what you call your hometown and where you grew up. So,
Yeah,
leave it to you.
I hail from the East Coast, so Seymour, Connecticut is the town that I spent my formative years in, and I was, I guess I don't know what else to add other than
That's
Seymour,
okay.
Connecticut.
Yeah.
That's where I'm.
Is it like coastal town?
So it's about 10 minutes outside of New Haven.
Okay.
So Yale was, about a 10-minute ride away, but. It's really interesting. Back east, everything is fairly dense, and so one town really just runs into the next.
Oh,
and so
There's no real division.
No,
Okay.
no. I mean, you would pass from one town to the next and not know that you're in another town. Whereas after moving out west, it was like, no, you have very defined towns with like centers, and then you clearly leave that town.
Yeah.
But, it was a really great place to grow up. It was like 14,000 people or so.
Oh, nice.
3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school. And, we were really fortunate to move into my grandparents' house. And it was on 2 acres adjacent water company property.
Oh, okay.
So it was really remote. We didn't really have a neighborhood, but of course it allowed us all sorts of freedom to be able to just explore and do what we want to do.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, get out in the woods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a really beautiful place. I really liked it, but, I premonition no return.
Oh, okay.
The West is just too good.
Just in case they get their hopes up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And in fact, most of them have moved away since. We've all kind of
Migrated.
scattered. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so there's not really a core holding it down in Connecticut
Gotcha.
anymore.
Did you get into any trouble with siblings in the wide open spaces that you had?
Yeah, so I've got a single younger sister, just 2 years younger than I am, and we got into our fair share of trouble. I wouldn't say much more than the average brother and sister pair, but we had a lot of really good times. So my parents got divorced when I was young. I think she was 3 and I was 5, and so then we were spending weekends with my father, and those were just all out party, like every weekend was just staying up late and watching movies. And one of the things we would do to kick off the weekend would be to go to the convenience store, and we'd have $1 to buy candy with, but I mean, it really wasn't that long ago. It was like the mid 80s, but we could buy a lot of candy for $1 and just continue to binge on that all weekend long.
Yeah, what was your go-to?
I'm trying to remember here. I loved Twizzlers.
Okay.
Still do. Big fan. I think I'd always, the Tootsie Rolls were really affordable.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
probably like 2 for a penny or something.
Yeah.
So you could get a lot of those, and then. I remember Sugar Daddies being pretty
Yes.
affordable and long-lasting.
Oh, yeah.
And so you get
little
good
bits of
bang
caramel.
for your buck there.
Yeah.
But I mean, we got on lots of adventures with my dad on the weekend. He was always taking us out, hiking and stuff.
Okay, so pretty outdoorsy.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep.
There's a lot to do out there too. I feel like the landscape is gives you room for that as well. So.
Yeah. It's funny in that it's this really ancient landscape that's, kind of covered up in most cases. But, it's gorgeous if you understand like what happened there and, how impressive the Appalachian Mountains were at one point. And the fact that you're looking around at it's a glacially carved landscape, but with no real dramatic features, right? It's almost like the glacier just plowed its way down and through.
Yeah.
But and comically enough, I didn't really have that appreciation for the landscape when I lived there because for whatever reason, like growing up in Connecticut, they didn't teach geology. I mean, you had some like watered down version of earth science with like, hydrologic cycles and stuff, but like we never learned about minerals. We never learned about different rock types. And so it wasn't until, after living out west for a while, and I actually, I went back to school, got my master's degree in education, and they looked at my transcript and they're like, "You've never taken a geology course?" And I'm like, "No." They're like, "Well, you're going to have to take one now." I'm like, "Sweet, let's do it." So here I was, in my mid-20s, a graduate student taking an undergrad, it was like a 100 level, geology course.
That's
But
wild.
I learned an incredible amount. And then after going back home, had this newfound appreciation of, geologically what happened there.
Yeah.
Why it
I
looks the way
think
it
that's
does.
pretty common. I mean, I grew up in Purdy, so growing up around here, Washington State, and I've been to the San Juan Islands at least once when I was a kid. I thought it was pretty, but I never really got in depth into it until even just going to Oregon, which I think is the same state, Oregon and Washington, but kind of like researching, learning more about all the cool ecosystems that we have here in Washington State. And I'm like, man, how did I not, appreciate this? And that's the beauty of maturing and gaining hindsight. But yeah, I would agree with that. So yeah, now when I come back, like we were out yesterday and I was like climbing on rocks looking at tide pools. So I'm like,
Yeah.
check it. Look what's in here.
It's like a 12-year-old again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's great. And with this knowledge, I'm always trying to pass it on. I've got 2 kids, an 8 and a 10-year-old, and I'm always trying to show them stuff. And because, it's so easy to just, accept things as they are. You're like, well, that's a tree. Yeah, sure, I know what trees are. And that's a rock. I know what rocks are. But, what you end up taking for granted just kind of obscures like how deeply interesting and unique everything is around you, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not just a tree, that's a Doug fir, or that's a Gary oak. And then, you could talk more about it. Or that's not just a rock, that's basalt that formed as part of a volcanic eruption 2,000 miles away in the South Pacific 100,000 years ago, right?
Yeah.
But to look at it, it's just a rock.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just a tree. And one of my favorite stories is how there was this Texas couple that had been using a rock as a doorstop for the last 20 years. And, they had a friend over and was like, "Do you realize your doorstop is a 20-pound meteorite?" And of course, they were just totally shocked. And I feel like, these are just perfectly, illustrating the fact how we just look around and we think we know what things are and we take them for granted. But if you actually dig deep and actually learn about these things, it reveals this whole wild and interesting world that was right there under your nose all along. But, in our waking day, it's usually just trees and rocks.
Yeah.
For sure. So you were a teacher at one point, I'm guessing? It sounds like you'd be a great teacher.
Yeah. You're inspiring curiosity.
I'm like, I need to go take a geology class, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm inherently really curious and I love learning, and I feel like anything is interesting like once you start digging into it. And I'm really careful about trying not to take too many things for granted. But of course, in order to function and get things done in your day, you got to keep moving. You can't stop and look at every tree and every rock. But yeah, no, I had determined that one of the most important jobs to be had was the education of other people, and so I decided that I would get my teaching degree. And did that at the University of Montana, Missoula.
Ooh, wow.
And
that's another great place to be, Montana.
Yeah,
It's just wild.
A little bit of geology there.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
And so I ended up graduating with my teaching degree there. And so it was, I think, secondary science is the endorsement. And Yeah, I had a girlfriend at the time. She grew up in Helena and had lived in Montana her whole life. And she's like, yeah, I'm really ready for something new. And I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to get a teaching job in Missoula. And I don't know if I want to move to Helena. And she definitely didn't want to move to Helena. So the negotiation began, okay, let's move further west. Okay, yeah. And I was pulling for Portland. And
Why was that?
Because I'd been there a handful of times. So we had some friends from Missoula, and I was actually spending summers in Glacier National Park. So kind of like 9 months of the year in Missoula and then 3 in Glacier National Park. And I'd met people up at Glacier National Park who had since moved to Portland, and we'd visited them Thanksgiving and other times a year. And I'm like, Portland's cool as hell, right? Like, just a really fun, youthful, interesting scene, good food, good beer, like.
All the amenities.
I know. I was like, this seems like a really comfortable place for me to live. And she was pulling for Seattle, and we'd been to Seattle a handful of times, but it didn't seem as interesting to me. And so we compromised on Olympia. And so we moved to Olympia from Missoula, and I was substitute teaching down there when a woman who I was subbing for long-term because she had knee surgery was like, hey, listen, my sister lives in Friday Harbor. She runs a toy store there. It turns out that they're in desperate need of a science teacher right now. And so this was right around Christmas. And so it was a really, it's the middle of the school year. It's a really unusual time. Well, apparently the woman they had hired for biology and then a couple other science classes, she had been working with really privileged children of diplomats, I guess, is the best way to describe it, in really small groups, maybe like 6 kids or something. And the island kids were just, beasts. And
too rambunctious.
She wasn't willing to, endure anymore. And so she's like, listen, Christmas break, I'm out of here. I'm sorry. I'm breaking contract. I can't do this.
Wow.
And
had you been to the island before?
No. Okay. And I'd only heard about it once before.
Wow.
So it was like one of my roommates in Missoula, his girlfriend went on a trip with some of her friends to San Juan Island. And I was like, oh, where is that? Like, what is that? Still hadn't been. The first time I was here was for the interview.
Wow. And, I love that your curiosity brought you here.
Yeah. And so I remember pulling in, when the ferry is coming in, I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, picture
that's exactly how we felt.
Sign me up.
Yeah, that's...
I'd never been on a ferry. I'd never been out to... we've been in the Pacific... I've been in the Pacific Northwest for 6 years now. And so I'd always wanted to come, and we had tried a couple times, and it just didn't work out. And so whenever you agreed to do the podcast, I was so stoked. So I was like, we finally get to go.
Yeah,
and I
get to ride the ferry.
I was so excited to get on the ferry. And immediately, we came over, it was like the 6 o'clock, and it was just the lights of the city, and it was a little
like foggy,
rainy, but it wasn't like too much rain. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I love this place so much.
Yeah, especially coming from Amarillo, where
I'm from Amarillo,
she thought
Texas.
people lived in ugly places and vacation to see the beautiful ones. She didn't know that you could go live in beautiful places.
It was just dirt. And I always said that we had trees, but the only reason we had trees was because people planted trees around their houses for wind protection. So there's actually not actual trees in Amarillo.
I have not made it to Texas yet. It's crazy. I've probably been to 80% of the states in the U.S. and have not made it to Texas yet.
Well, let me know before you go. I'll give you some suggestions. It's a big state. You can do a lot. It depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, we've driven a good portion of it, like all the way down to Houston and then out towards and up towards Vermont. But I was surprised. I was like, after 10 hours, I was like, "Are we through Texas?"
No.
And she's like, "No, not even close." And I'm like, "Holy cow!" Yeah.
Anyway, so you pulled into the harbor.
Yeah, and
for the interview.
I was like, okay, this is it. Like, I definitely will be taking this job if they offer it to me.
Yeah, decision made.
And it was pretty funny because the principal wasn't there to pick me up, and so I just walked off the ferry, and I didn't know where to go or what to do. The only thing that I had as like a guiding constellation was the address to the toy shop.
Oh, okay.
And so I walked up there and said, "Hi, I'm Jessie. You know, I was the substitute for your sister." She's like, "Oh, yeah, great. Come in." And she gave a call to the principal, like to the superintendent,
Oh,
and was like, "Hey, yeah, we got a kid who's interviewing to be the science teacher here, but, you know, Fred, who was the principal at the time, isn't here, so can you send somebody over?" And so, yeah, the principal came and got me at the toy shop, and
Nice.
we did the interview. It was really funny. We went down to Downriggers for the interview, and it was like superintendent, principal, me, and the toy shop owner. And it was time to order some drinks, and it was really funny because at that moment, everybody was like looking around at each other like, is this going to be like a drinking interview?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
what's it going to be? And this is for a teaching position. So I was like, wow, that's pretty funny. Like, it was actually on the table that we might start drinking as part of my interview.
Yeah.
But nope, I think the superintendent ordered tea, and then so everybody
Gotcha.
else ordered like tea or coffee.
Responsible.
But yeah,
I've had a couple brewery interviews where the brewer's drinking. He's like, "Do you want a beer?" And I'm like, "No." And then he's like 3 beers deep, still asking me questions. So I'm like, "Okay, I think this has got off the rails." Yeah.
So, but yeah, that went really well. But, you know, it was kind of a battle in that it wasn't long after that where budget cutbacks started to shrink the number of teachers, and I was the low man on the totem pole. And so I was really just trying to hold on for a long time. And in that process, ended up teaching algebra and geometry for a few years.
Okay, so taking on like more course load.
Yeah, just being bumped out of science and then trying to find my way back. Because all these seniority things just had people shifting around.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, I mean, I would say ultimately by my 5th year of teaching, I had anchored the science position. But it was also at that point that I knew I wasn't a lifetime teacher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, I'm like, I cannot do this the rest of my life. If I do, I'm going to be one of those really callous, like really grumpy teachers because the coping mechanism for dealing with kids that are playing you all the time. And I mean, I had great rapport with the kids in general, but it's still, you're being tested on a regular basis. And I think, you know, psychologically, the most likely outcome in terms of my way for coping with that would have just been to like, you know, just become callous, to become kind of insensitive. And I was like, no, that's not good. And, you know, it's the rare teacher that's able to teach for a lifetime and avoid that. But I'm like, I don't think that's my destiny, you know, that's not how I want it to play out. And so it was 5 years in that I was making alternative career plans, though I continued to teach for another 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What did you, I think one that's really astute for you to have that. I think obviously we'll get into your brewing career, but I've seen that a lot. And I think some people don't know when to call it quits. And then it's like, oh, this person's been here for 10 years. And that's something where I see it's like, he's not helping the business, but you're also not helping him with his life or her life, you know? And so I think that's really good awareness to realize like, I can see how this might make me numb and insensitive, and I don't want that to become. So props to you.
Thanks.
And so when you were thinking about at this realization, what other careers did you have in mind? At this point, had you started home brewing? Was that even on the table or?
Yeah, it was brewing.
Oh, it was?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So when I got here, there was a brewery on island called the Front Street Ale House / San Juan Island Brewing. I don't know what they actually called it because outside the building it said the Front Street Ale House. But like we've got an old glass of theirs that says like San Juan Brewing on it or something like that. So, but they were doing, you know, just an okay job. And to be honest, I wanted to love it so much more than I actually did. And they had all sorts of plumbing issues in the building. They had way too many investors. They didn't have good raw materials storage. There was just this So I actually ended up, when I was serious about it, met with the head brewer there and talked to him about all the challenges that they were experiencing, that they had experienced. So they closed in like 2010.
Wow.
And so here it was like 2012, where I was, 5 years into teaching and was like, yeah, this is the direction that I think I want to go.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, yeah, they weren't doing a great job. They ultimately closed in 2010. I had started homebrewing as soon as I moved here.
Okay.
So 2008, in Anacortes, I bought like a home brewing kit and started brewing. And I mean, there was I always had homebrew from then up until, I still have some like homebrew at home that's just being ignored, I guess. But yeah, that's when it started, for me. But really, my stepfather and my father were homebrewers in the 90s.
Oh, awesome.
And so,
That's amazing.
yeah, so like as a kid, they were brewing on the weekends. And so, my dad was doing, malt extract brewing.
Oh, yeah.
My stepfather was doing, I think it started partial grain and then was doing, all grain.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, smack packs, I knew what those were. I knew the ingredients in beer.
Yeah.
I knew how you made beer. And then it was still a really exciting time. So even in Connecticut and, the mid 90s, and so, I'm like 15 years old, they're sharing all these different new beers to me, which, it wasn't American light lager.
No, yeah.
People were making brown ales and red ales and, all sorts of stuff. I'll never forget the first IPA I had was Victory's Hop Devil.
Oh, yeah.
And this was in like 1995, I think. And what an outrageous beer. I couldn't believe how bitter it was. I was like, this is absolutely insane. And it was a total trip. I had a Victory Hop Devil about a month ago because our media person was part of a Brewers Association internship type program.
Okay.
And so she met somebody who was working for, so it's like Southern Tier, Victory, and there's like one other brewery that's under Six Point that are under this pretty, it's like Craft Brewers Alliance, I want to say, or something like
umbrella.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we sent him some beer, and he sent us some Victory beers.
Nice.
And so
Nostalgia.
yeah, and what a trip.
Yeah.
So
did it just bring back those memories of when you? Okay.
Oh yeah, I was like, it's just outrageous. There's so much crystal malt in there, and I'm sure that Victory has dialed back the amount of crystal malt since then.
Used to be.
So I can only imagine. But yeah, it's like this, reddish brown and loads of crystal malt sweetness.
Yeah.
And just an outrageous beer. But they did Victory. That was the first brewery that I ever fell in love with. They were making like an imperial stout that was called Storm King, and I was like, this is awesome. Like, what an incredible beer. And there was a Belgian triple. I can't think of the name of it. But so here I was in the mid 90s by virtue of the fact that my dad and stepfather were not only brewing all these different styles, but they were buying whatever they could and allowing me to try it. And
teaching and continuing that curiosity.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And so I was getting good exposure early on. I remember the first time seeing Cascade hops. I'm like, what is this? And it was compressed into like a medallion. It was like a disc. It was like a puck.
Oh, interesting.
And he's like, here, smell this. He's like, I'm like, whoa. And it just was like so piney and like resinous. And I was like, what is that? And he's like, those are Cascade hops, from the Pacific Northwest. And I'm like, whoa, cool.
Yeah.
So anyhow, plenty of exposure early on by virtue of the fact that my dad and stepfathers were homebrewers. And so I had planned on homebrewing for, over a decade before I was finally in the right situation as a teacher here where I purchased my first home brewing kit.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah.
That could be more like storytelling,
I know,
picturesque,
right?
or fairy tale. Is
And
how I
it
feel.
sounds like at the time then, if the other brewery had closed, if this was 2012, there probably wasn't any other craft beer necessarily on the island at all. So your need for that might, like making your own is even cooler to be like, I want some craft beer, I'm going to make my own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, no, the island is great in so many ways, but it's an island, and so it's lacking in so many ways as well. Like, when I first moved here, there was no decent pizza, and so I was like, looks like I'm going to learn how to make my own pizza, because all the pizza here is garbage. Since then, we've got the bakery making incredible pizza. We make great pizza here, so things are improving. But yeah.
That's awesome. So how did you like share your homebrew with people and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was really fun. I mean, there was one other. So in the beginning, these were all kits from. Oh man, what was the name of that? I can't remember, but it was all extract brewing initially, and then I made the investment and then started to do. All grain brewing. And when I started to do all grain brewing, I enlisted, I had a friend who was already doing all grain brewing. And so he brewed with me the first couple of times so that I could minimize my chances of screwing it up.
Yeah.
And, they turned out decent, every one of them. I think my second or third batch had, it was a great introduction to diacetyl.
Yes.
And I had decided that I was going to try to regulate fermentation temperature by putting the carboy in my kegerator, right? And so I was trying to control temperature it was a chest freezer that I was using a Johnson control to hold refrigeration temperatures.
Oh, yeah.
But like high refrigeration temperatures, and it didn't work. So it ended up stressing out the yeast pretty hard, and they produced all kinds of diacetyl that they did not mop up at the end. And I was like, what is this? Like butterscotch flavor.
Yeah.
Like, what is it? And it was funny because like I knew it was a flaw, but I didn't hate it. Yeah. And honestly, I loved the texture. I was like, oh, it just fills out the body so
Kinda
much.
Like oily, slick.
Yeah. And I was like, I really like this about it.
Yeah.
But
So that's off flavor,
I know. You do a quick search, and it doesn't take long. You're like, oh, diacetyl.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how much of your I feel like I just can hear like your science teacherness knowledge come through. Like how much of that has like played a role in not only your home brewing but your brewing career, like your interest for everything?
Yeah, no, I think of science as a way of life, a way of perceiving, a way of reacting. I mean, to me, everything can be reduced to science. And so obviously in brewing, where it's a really neat fit, there's no exception there. Where I always thought it'd be great to have a t-shirt or a sticker that says scientists make better beer, because you're just so I mean, I guess you can be just fine without it. But man, is it so useful at times, especially when you're problem solving, when you're encountering a situation where something didn't go like you expected it to, and then you have to investigate, like, what do I think went wrong? Okay, if this was the cause, then we would have expected this. Well, did we see that or not? And then, well, okay, if we want to avoid that, how are we going to do this differently in the future, and what other aspects of the process is that going to affect? So, I mean, I approach almost all challenges in my life through a scientific lens. Yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah,
so,
the working smarter, not harder is definitely, I think, been a big improvement for craft beer. I've worked with way too many people that's how we've always done it, and they just don't seem to question. And then like you problem solve it, you walk it through the steps, and you decide like, okay, this is where I think this problem is occurring, and I don't think we need this here, and we can take this out and reduce waste, increase time and efficiency. And it takes them a while, and they're like, you know what, yeah, that was a good thing. It's like, see, it doesn't always have to be this hit your head against a wall all the time.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's never an acceptable explanation for anything. Oh, that's the way we've always done it. It's
Yeah.
like, no. You shouldn't be able to justify anything with that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of ties along with the dogma of, and I say a lot of, not older brewers as in like age, but like this old mentality of brewers are hard workers. And then I learned a lot. It's like, oh, you guys you redo work a lot.
Yeah.
Like that's why you work
Yeah.
16-hour
Yeah.
days. And you're like, yeah, it's like you could have got that done in 8, but yeah.
Mhm.
So it's almost like this weird badge of pride they like to wear. And it's like, we're in 2024 now where people are getting neural implants in their head to
Yeah.
be able to function and operate stuff now. I think we can move on from that.
Yeah. And honestly, there's some inherent dangers with brewing and challenges that I feel like if you're going to be able to successfully do this long term, like you can't just be doing things because that's the way that they've been done. Like you really have to examine why you're doing those things, and is there a safer way to do them? Because honestly, even in my time, so we're coming up on our 7-year anniversary in July. I'm like,
Congrats.
wow, in order for me to be able to do this for a significant amount of time, like, physically, I have to be really careful. I
Yeah.
mean, I've gotten, small injuries a handful of times. We've had a couple of times where I don't know if the floor was settling because we built this place from the ground up, and we had sight glasses that were exploding during CIP. It was like,
Wow.
it happened once, and then we're like, wow, that was weird, and of course, really dangerous. And then it happened again like 3 weeks later. We're like, what the crap?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you start to realize that, this really is a factory setting, as small of a factory setting as it is. And there are some real inherent dangers that if you're not exceptionally careful, and if you don't have good process with safety built in, that like people are going to get hurt.
Yeah.
Like, that's a real concern.
We know that.
Yeah, I think there's yes, through many of my roles, there's always this expectation to be able to multitask, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But also you need to be able to multitask effectively, safely, and efficiently, which are two different things. I've worked with people that can do 12 different things. They'll have a transfer going, they're running a CIP, they're milling in, they're doing lab work, and then things start to spin out of control, and then they're in a mood, and it just is like, yeah, why don't you do 2 or 3 things at once? Like, the CIP timer, and it's cooked up safe and correctly. Great. I love to do this little segment of like, do you have a story that stands out to you that was really shocking and telling, and was kind of like one of those things of, okay, we need to be on top of this, we need to be better, or that was scary, let's not have that again? Do you have one that sticks out, or no?
Yeah, sure. My worst day here. It
I love the
wasn't.
title of that.
Yeah, and it wasn't particularly dangerous. I suppose it could have been, and I don't think there was anybody in the building, but so we spunned all of our beers. Our tanks are rated at 30 up to 30 psi, 2 atmospheres.
Oh, wow.
And so we're this is absolutely critical for us. So one of the biggest oversights in this brewery, and eventually I'll get to the story of how the brewery came to be.
Yeah.
But is it okay? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
you guys
100%.
let me know if
This is perfect. No.
chronology is just too all over the place.
No.
And I
No,
can
this
make
is
it
flowing
more...
just fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest oversights was CO2 here. So we can't transport CO2 on the ferry. So that means that basically all CO2 needs to be brought over on a private barge. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, those are expensive.
Oh, yeah.
So what we were doing for a while was working with CO2 dewars, which it's like a tank that's about 5 feet tall or so, and it's got liquid CO2 in the bottom and then gas in the head space. And we would have 3 of them at a time that were tied into our CO2 piping. but it was still not enough CO2. You couldn't accomplish processes of like purging a tank. I mean, I would have to like use whatever head, CO2 was in the head space, wait like 2 hours for all of that liquid to boil off and create more. And so it was really slowing down my ability to get things done, my process. But on top of that, when you're not using it, it just continues to boil off within the tank. It hits a 300 psi threshold, which by code you can't have any more than that.
Yeah.
It then has to vent to atmosphere. So my process was being starved when I needed it, and then we were just venting it off to atmosphere and wasting it a significant portion of the time. So we're like, this is just garbage. We need a microbulk tank. So I get in touch with Praxair, and they come out here, and they can install this 2,000-pound tank, and I get it filled like 3 times a year. But in order to do that, they have to put a truck on a barge and bring it over here, and that truck on the barge is twice what it cost me for the CO2 that they filled the tank with. So we had planned regardless early on to try to use CO2 produced during fermentation to naturally carbonate the beers, and having tanks rated at 2 psi means you could spund them pretty high. I mean, you could go up to like 30 psi if you want to, but that's too high for yeast. I mean, I figured that out eventually, where basically I wouldn't spund them above 1 atmosphere, but to get that last little bit of carbonation, instead of messing around with a carb stone, I'd just throw head pressure on it.
Oh, let it saturate in.
Yeah. So when you're spunding the beer, you have to close the blow-off arm for a second to attach the spunding apparatus on, and then you open up that valve again. Well, if you don't open up that valve again, the tank just continues to build pressure. And I had a pretty tough week, not going to make excuses, but like it was a canning week, and those are always way more stressful because, we're trying to hold 5 beers so that we can can 5 beers, but keep production flowing the whole time. And it wasn't a great canning either. We had some troubles, and of course, if the canning line goes down, where are they going to get parts from? They're running to like a hardware store to try to get stuff. I mean, one time they flew up a part. I mean, it can be just crazy. So anyhow, spunding a tank, and I don't know if I got interrupted in the process, but I never opened the blow-off arm again. And so overnight, that tank was just continually building pressure. And we have rupture discs that will rupture at 32 psi. And I came in the next day, and I opened up the door, and I could smell what just smelled like beer everywhere. And I was like, what? And so I come around the corner, and insulation from the ceiling is just like laying on the floor all over the place, and there's just beer on everything.
Oh no.
And I open up the cold room, and there's still beer raining down from the ceiling onto our tanks, and a bunch of the beer that we just canned.
Oh God.
And so yeah, I mean,
That's so defeating.
it must have just gone off like a shotgun blast. 32 psi, full tank, blasting out of a 2-inch hole in the top, hard enough to like hit this paper that we have on the ceiling, saturate the insulation. It just all dropped down.
Wow.
And then all of it pooled on top of the cold room, and then started dripping down between the seams.
Oh my goodness.
And so, yeah, I mean, it was an entire day of just cleaning up that mess. And so obviously I was traumatized after that. I mean, and was like, any time that I'm closing that blow-off arm,
There's
I'm
this
not leaving
flashback
until,
reminder.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then my guys here, my assistant brewers, have never had that experience, so I've told them about it, and I kept the twisted rupture disc as a reminder. but I'm like, you need to let me know that you've reopened this blow off arm. Please text me and let me know, because it's just such an incredible mess. I mean, if you were in here, it must have been so loud. Like, I think it could have potentially damaged somebody's hearing when it went off.
Thankfully, no one got hurt.
I know.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, nobody told me. I discovered it myself the next morning.
Wow.
Yeah, I used to have nightmares all the time, especially after my weekend cellar shifts. I'd wake up at like 3 a.m. and be like, did I turn off the CO2 to that tank?
We would drive back
and we would
down
drive
to
back
the
down and
brewery
let myself in the building and be like,
make sure.
okay, I did. But like, I'm glad now I don't have that workload anymore.
Oh, I've done that a handful of times. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and just drive in and be like, I can't remember if I turned cooling on or if I turned the CO2 off or opened the blow-off arm. There was one great time that, and in the beginning it was just me, right? And I was new and working really long hours. One of the goofier moments was, it was probably on like my third double brew day in a row, and I'm knocking out into the tank and I'm monitoring, where it's above the temperature probe, and so I'm dialing in my knockout temperature. We do all that manually, and I'm on my way home, and I'm like, God, it was so weird how like I kept trying to increase the temperature of the wort going into the fermenter, and it just never went up. And then I realized I was looking at the wrong temperature controller display. The whole time. I was knocking a different one. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I just slam on the brakes, flip the car around, come in, I'm like, holy hell, what is it gonna be?
Yeah, real hot beer.
I was staring at the wrong one the whole time.
140 degrees.
And, I wear contact lenses. I was able to see, I'm walking up to it, and you can see the displays from about like 40 feet away. And I'm looking, I'm getting closer and closer. I'm like, oh my God, the actual temperature was about 1 degree Fahrenheit off of target.
Oh.
Like, could not believe it.
That's amazing.
I was totally adjusting wort temperature off a different display, and we got it.
Yeah, you knocked out
He's like, nailed it. I was just like, holy shit, that is just ridiculous.
That's good luck.
But yeah, couldn't believe what a like just sinking moment in the car. It was so strange that in my mind's eye, I realized that, oh my God, I was looking at F2 and I was knocking out into F4.
Yeah.
And I realized that as I'm driving home. It never occurred to me once that whole brew day. I don't know how.
No. That's just that autopilot and going, especially when you know how processes work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. When we were at Elsewhere, my mentor, Josh, he was showing the staff, they worked on with us on a brew day, and he was talking into the knockout, what the steps that are going on, the biology of what the yeast are going to do, and he's pouring the yeast in there because we use dry packets. And it's like, yeah, we want this to go in, at like 55, 60 degrees. And so the servers go and like touch it and like, ow. And he was like talking and teaching and totally let it just like go at its like boil. So it was like 140 degrees. He's like, well, that yeast is dead. He's like, but don't worry, we'll just let it cool down. We'll pitch again tomorrow. So he was that type of person where he was always on it. He's like, idiot. So dumb.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing, man. When you're working long hours and like that, shit just gets weird.
Yeah.
Like things like you think you're totally, cognizant of like what you're doing and what's going on. And suddenly there's all this evidence in support of like, holy crap, what am I doing? Like, this is out of control. Like, this is just crazy.
We also, one of my favorite ones, we had a glycol chiller go down at Freem, but the sensor wasn't showing it. So we were packaging off this tank. It was Pilsner, and it said it was like 34 degrees, which is already really cold for canning. It doesn't need to be that cold. But as it was coming out, I remember it literally looked like it was crystallizing already. And I was like, what's going on? No, the tank was actually at like 28 degrees and it was chilling the beer down too. So we had to stop it. But it's like, unless the packagers because the people packing off, they won't know. If the operator wasn't looking and being like, why does it look like it's basically turning into a slushy already?
Yeah.
Yeah,
slushy.
then realized.
Yeah.
And then, that way we looked at like the lines too. The lines were like freezing up, and I was like, oh, this is not good.
Something-
So,
Yeah, I've been there before. So we make hef, and it is just a strange beast. I mean,
Mhm.
it's almost not like making beer. And we have real stratification problems with that beer in tank, way more so than any other beer style that
Yeah.
we make. And yeah, it'll just go off on, it'll have this, really strange stratification where it's cooling for like 48 hours and not getting any colder. And you're like, well, okay, there's some beer in there at
Yeah.
some level that's really cold
Yeah.
right
Cool.
now. And so you got to just turn it off and allow that density driven change to kind of stir it up. And then suddenly you're looking at beer that's like 27 degrees. You're like, great, it's basically beer slushy in there.
Yeah.
Well, at one time that had happened, it's one of the early times, right before a canning. And as you're canning and you're drawing down the level of the tank, you're drawing those strata down over the temperature probe. And I was just watching it get colder and colder. And so I'm just like, I let the operator know. I'm like, hey, man, let me know if you start to see slush because, I'm seeing like 27, 28 degrees on the temperature probe right now. So, all
pretty
kinds of
wild.
stuff.
Yeah, science is fun in
Science.
brewing.
Yeah.
It always seems to come about when there's a problem too. It's like, let's figure out the science behind this of why it's happening.
Yeah, that's
So
fun.
fun that we got those stories out of the way.
Yeah.
And you said that story happened about a year or two after you'd been at San Juan. So how did San Juan Brewing come to be?
Yeah. So here I am, teacher, knowing that I'm not a career teacher. And so at that point, I really ramped up my home brewing. It was like, okay, this has to become a part-time job for me. I'm not going to go to school for it. I'm going to learn every last thing that I can through home brewing. I did end up taking a short course at UC Davis, so one of their like 40-hour courses with Charlie Bamforth. But that was it in terms of like what I paid for as far as schooling goes, and was just committed to making homebrew nonstop. And then trying to meet people. So, Colshan was open in Bellingham at the time. I had a friend who was a brewer there.
Okay. Is that also an easier ferry to go from here to Bellingham as opposed to Seattle?
No, you got to
I guess it also has your favorite things over there. You can mountain bike, ski, you can do a bunch of outdoor things.
Yeah, and so the story also goes that the girl that I moved to the island with, she, things didn't work out, and she left that summer. So I get here like January 2008. I'm getting my ass kicked teaching because it's really hard in the beginning. It's nice in that here at Friday Harbor, they didn't have a fully established curriculum, right? Like all the lessons and the quizzes and the tests and labs, they weren't made, right? Like nobody's like handing them to you. So you got to do that all yourself.
Wow.
While you're trying to figure out like how you're going to run a classroom and, assimilate in this new small community. So it was really hard. The relationship didn't survive through that. She left that summer, but the following summer, I met somebody at Downriggers, who's actually my current partner and the mother of my children. She was trying to have breakfast by herself, and it was really interesting because, I had never really been outgoing when it came to like meeting girls. That changed.
Yeah.
I was like, suddenly, like anytime I saw a girl approximately my age who might be single, I was like, hey, I'm Jesse, who are you? And but yeah, Monk Island will do that too.
I was about to say,
and
trying to fit into a community and not be lonely.
Yeah, and there's
Very
just
tough.
not a lot of people in their late 20s, so that was kind of tough. But yeah, she was trying to have breakfast by herself, and I was like, whoa, look, there's that. So I was with a teacher friend of mine and his girlfriend, and was like, who's that girl eating breakfast by herself? That's crazy. And my teacher friend's girlfriend was like, oh, that's Katie. I met her at the Whale Museum yesterday. I'm like, well, get her over here.
Help me out.
Yeah. And she was like, how do I do that? Like, you pretend you're going to the bathroom. You say, oh, hey, Katie, how you doing? Come have breakfast with us. She wouldn't come have breakfast with us, but fortunately, so I was teaching math at the time, and I was trying to take this math test that the state administers to be able to teach calculus, which I really didn't feel comfortable doing, but I was like, okay, the school wants me to do it, I'll do it. Well, I was in Bellingham the weekend before taking this test, and I guess I kind of let my guard down because I'd been living on the island, but I didn't lock my car, and so somebody just opened up the car door and stole some stuff out of my car. One of those things being my wallet, because I actually left that on the passenger seat. But anyhow, I was telling Katie, I was like, yeah, I was just in Bellingham last weekend. My car got broken into. They stole all my stuff.
And she pulled out the wallet?
She was just so in love with Bellingham that she became really defensive and was like, what? Where were you? What happened? Blah, blah. I'm like,
oh, okay.
That's it. I'm like, get over here. We're yelling, like, across the restaurant here. So
actually, your first meeting was almost an argument.
it was
Yeah,
where
yeah.
it was like, Bellingham sucks. And she was like, no, it's great.
Yeah.
But so she, as the story goes, we went kayaking, went crabbing, got her to stay. We were doing alternating weekends between Bellingham and Friday Harbor, and so yeah, where was I going?
We were talking about how you went from home brewing to San Juan, like kind of the steps in between. And you've been talking about there was a brewery that you had a friend working at.
Cold ship.
Yeah, right. Oh, so this is why I'm spending so much time in Bellingham. And so that friend is a friend of hers who has since gone on to start Lost Giant Cider.
Oh, okay.
Awesome guy. And then, Wander was opening at the time, and so I got to meet Chad and talk to him about opening a brewery. So I'm trying to, meet as many people, network, make as many connections as possible, and just gather information about, what it's actually like as opposed to just my romantic vision of, what brewing is. And I didn't give up and was like, no, this is the next step. This is ultimately what we're going to do. And fast forward. We're at about, I'm going to say May 2013. And I'm looking for investors because I don't have any extra money. I don't want to be, to go into a bunch of debt. I just don't want the financial liability.
Yeah.
I want somebody else to invest in it. And not to mention, just to make it a little more substantial, a project too. I don't want to start making 3 barrels at a time.
Yeah.
So
you want it to come out professional and all put together.
Yeah, exactly. And so start talking to some folks. It's one nice thing about San Juan is there's, a fair number of people with money. And I knew some of these people. I was like, hey, listen, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Are you interested? And I had found a woman who was seriously considering, and then she fell in love and moved to Arizona.
Oh,
so
dang.
I was like, oh, shit. But
happy for her.
Yeah,
I know. But on her way out, she's like, hey, listen, I think Vern owns the grocery stores here on Island.
Oh, King's Market?
Yeah.
Okay,
King's
gotcha.
and Marketplace.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And I heard he might be interested. He's considering doing a brewery, so you should talk to him. She's like, but you can't call him directly. You have to call his guy, and then, he'll arrange the meeting for the two of you. And I'm like, cool.
Formal, old school.
Yeah, I know. Loved it. And so I arranged the meeting, and we had the meeting. I brought homebrew. It went really well. And like I said, that was kind of May 2013.
Wow.
So I'm still, I'm not giving up. Oh yeah, we found our guy. This is it. So I'm meeting with other people. Some people had some really terrible ideas. And I'm like, oh shit. And
more amber ale all the time.
Just the kookiest stuff. I mean, just really absurd.
Yeah.
Disneyland venues. And I'm just Roadhouse style and all. I'm like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? And
There's a reason those places don't exist anymore.
yeah. And it was just silly, and I was getting kind of discouraged. But then, where the bakery is, so Mark Shepard, who started the bakery, I was talking to him because the bakery was really small at that time, and they had like 2,000 square feet behind what was just the bakery, a really small space at that time, and it's adjacent to the airport. And when I was a junior in high school, my parents, my family, and I, we went to Germany and drank a lot of beer. I think the first time I ever got drunk with them was at the Hofbräuhaus in Munich. And
that's picturesque. That's lovely.
No, it was fun. Drank lots of Radler, which I really enjoyed. And one of the more memorable experiences was we were just driving. I think we were on our way kind of up through the Alsace region, the territory that's, I think, France now, but at one time was Germany. And we just found a beer garden alongside an airstrip. And they were launching gliders.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I was like, you just chill out, you drink a beer, and you watch, the gliders get towed into the air, and they let them go, and the gliders come in later. And I was like, sweet. So here we are looking at this potential bakery, brewery adjacent. I'm like, this is the spot. Like, I want to do it here.
You have this memory playing out. And you're like, this could be it.
So I'm like, I got to find somebody else to finance this, but like, this is the spot for it. Well, it was also at the time when pot had just been legalized, and so there was some other folks who were really interested in putting a pot store in that space. So I was, kind of lobbying for a brewery there, and then he had these other guys that really wanted to put a pot store there. Well, as it turns out, it was too close to a baseball field that the schools lease from a church. There you got to be like at least 1,000 feet away, and it was like only 990 feet away or something.
Oh, wow.
So they couldn't do the pot store. So I was like, yes, I'm going to be able to put my brewery in there. And then Mark's like, but
it's also alcohol.
Nope. He's like, I'm going to expand the bakery. I think, things are going really well, and we're going to need all this space.
Gotcha.
So I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
Well, like a day after that conversation, Vern calls me back. So this is months later. So we met in like May 2013. And this was like school had started. So this was like the second week of September 2013.
Oh, wow.
And he calls me in, and I go in there, and he's already got a business plan on the table. And I'm like, whoa. And he's like, well, just so you know, I'm really interested in doing this brewery, but it's really for my stepsons. And I'm like, well, okay. Is there a place for me? And he's like, but yeah, I think that, we'd love to give you the brewer's position if you're interested. And I was like, well, I did tell you before that I'm not interested in just being an employee, that I'd want some amount of ownership. And he's like, well, that's definitely an option. And if things worked out, it would get there, right? But, we'll have to talk about what things look like initially. I'm like, okay, sounds great. But I was like, where'd you get this business plan from? The business plan was written by a kid who grew up here, who, as a college student, was like volunteering at Boundary Bay.
Oh, wow.
Who later went to a winemaking program at UC Davis, and through an internship, ultimately ended up getting a job as the head winemaker at Screaming Eagle Vineyards in Napa, California.
Wow.
Which is, I don't know if you know, they're like
they're
10-year waiting list, $800 bottles of wine.
Very prestigious.
Well, he wrote the business plan for Vern. He's like, listen, if anybody is going to do this,
because he grew
it's
up
going to
here.
be you. Yeah, he grew up here.
Okay.
And he's just so passionate about the winemaking industry, the brewing industry, and in fireworks. So he loves fireworks, and he has a fully volunteer and all donation fireworks show that he puts on Lopez Island every year that is one of the best in the country, like rivals San Francisco and like their.
We'll bookmark this that we need to be here for 4th of July, Lopez Island.
And he's just the awesomest dude. I mean, he's just great. And
so is he an owner in San Juan as well?
He's not.
Oh, okay.
No, so we hired him as the consultant.
Oh, okay,
which
gotcha.
Was huge, right? Because I just didn't have that experience. And so I mean, he holed up with another guy from JV Northwest, who makes tank manufacturer that's got bought by ICC. They holed up for 3 days, and they sketched out our entire brew house that we have right now.
That's awesome.
He designed all of our fermenters. He laid out, this whole space back here. He's the reason we have this crazy ass this drive-in double rack system. I can show you later. But totally unsolicited, just gave this to Vern. So it was all kind of adding up. I looked at it, was dated November 2013. So he gives it to Vern around Christmas time. And then I show up a few months later, I guess 6 months later or so. And I'm like, hey, I want to do a brewery. So he's got this one guy saying, here's a business plan. If anybody does a brewery, you should do it. And then I show up and I'm like, listen, I want to do a brewery.
Stars aligning.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so he's like,
that's
wow,
incredible.
Maybe I have to seriously look into this.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he brings it to his stepsons and they're like, oh, shit, yeah, let's do this. We're interested. And so, that was it. That's how it all effectively came together. However, that was September 2013. Oh, wait. September 2013. And business plan written November 2013. I come see him May 2014. And then I'm meeting with him again September 2014.
Gotcha.
And so this September, it'll be 10 years from that meeting with him where he said, yes, I want to do the brewery. You're the brewer. This is Nick Islison. He wrote this business plan, and I'm really doing this for my stepsons.
That's pivotal.
So, but it took forever for us to find a place to do this. And in fact, this property, he made an offer on it, a year before they accepted our second offer. They denied the first time around. So it was really tough. It took us over a year to find a spot.
Okay, to get the actual space.
Yeah. And we didn't open until July 2017. So it was like September 2014, green light, we're going to do this. Doors don't get open until July 2017. So I ended up doing a few more years as a teacher.
That makes sense.
I was just like,
that could be painstaking too.
It was a little rough just because it just kept getting pushed back because we really couldn't find a location.
Yeah.
And, Sean, who's the general manager here, I remember just long conversations with him on the phone, I was almost like, just lie to me, just tell me we're good in 4 months. We're gonna start breaking ground,
Kind of like that friend that hikes. It's like, are we there yet? It's like, another 5 minutes. Yeah.
And it was just bad. I never wanted to let him off the phone because I just wanted him to keep talking till he told me that we were gonna break ground really soon. But it did take that long. A couple extra years of teaching. So. The school year ends June 2016, and I'm done, right? We actually Vern had purchased this piece of property and hired a general contractor. They started doing a little bit of work, excavating, kind of moving dirt around. But I'm done teaching. I know I'm not going back. And I reach out to my friend Abe, who is now the head cider maker and one of the co-founders of Lost Giants Cider. He was a lead brewer at Colshan at the time, and I'm like, hey man, what do you think about giving me an internship this summer? He's like, oh, I'll talk about it, with the owner, we'll see. Well, they accepted, and so I did 3 weeks where it was 5 days a week, 8 hours a day as an intern at Colshan's James Street facility.
Oh,
Wow.
awesome.
And then when that was done, I was like, hey, what do you think about me maybe doing another internship, this time at the K2 facility? And they're like, all right, we'll see. And then, they accepted. I did that for almost 2 months.
Wow.
And then while I was there, I reached out to Frank and Bo Trossett at Aslan and was like, hey, I'm going to be the head brewer at San Juan Island Brewing. What do you think about me doing an internship? And Frank was like, oh, hell yeah. He's like, if somebody had offered that to me, because that was his first professional brewing gig, was like, I would have been, over the moon. So I ended up doing
From Colshan to Aslan?
Yeah. So I
Wow.
did 3 weeks Colshan James Street, 2 months Colshan K2, and then 2 months at Aslan.
Wow.
And so that was huge, right? That gave me a ton of experience to
How-
ensure that I could be successful once I finally stepped into the brewer's seat here.
Yeah. How long were you at Aslan for?
2 months.
Oh, 2 months?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. I didn't know if it was there for longer.
Yeah, that's nice that you had just experience in other, being, I think a lot of brewers don't have experience at multiple breweries. So I'm sure that
Right.
was huge for you to be in a couple different facilities
Mhm.
to see how different people, because I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do
Yeah.
things. There's a lot of right ways, a lot of wrong ways, but there's a lot of you can figure it out for the space and whatnot. So I'm sure that was really impactful for you.
But I know that even though my resume looks to some a little odd, because most people work at one brewery and stay there for a while, I have 3.5 years, 2.5 years, year and a half, whatever. Working in a variety of facilities, you're able to experience and learn a lot more on how to do things differently, where someone's like, well, I've never seen that. And it's like, well, you've been in this place for 10 years and you guys have been doing it this way for a long time. So that's just an awesome pedigree to go from Colshan to Bellingham to Aslan and then, to San Juan Island Brewing.
Yeah, because, even within Colshan, they had different SOPs for James Street than they had for K2, just because, they've got different equipment there, so they've got different process.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's wild.
I think, and it was probably 2017, I was with my younger brother Taylor. We went to Pint Defiance, which is the local craft beer bar tap room in Tacoma. And I remember looking at the can row and I was like, whoa, I've never heard of San Juan Island Brewing, because your label really stuck out. It was clean and it was an ESB. And
Nice.
and they also, I think it's still called Black Boar, but you had your export, or the London Porter. And so we sat down and cracked those at the bar and we were like, this is awesome. It was so clean and so good. What was your inspiration for starting with something like an ESB as one of your core beers? Because in 2017, that's not a thing. Now everybody loves and wants to do English mild beers. I mean, the last brewery is out. That's all we did.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
Steeplejack. Yeah, we love it.
Nice. I mean, we're coming onto the scene 2017, and IPA had been reigning supreme for a decade, and I was just kind of irritated, right? Because we started this whole craft beer revolution, which began with homebrewing, because the grocery store shelves were nothing but American light lager. We want variety, right? And so I could already see that IPA was becoming so popular that it was becoming the next monoculture.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, that's so antithetical to the whole reason we're doing this. We can't let it go that way, And so I was like, no, we're going to be all about doing, traditional styles that, aren't getting a lot of time in the spotlight and that people maybe don't know about. This was really important to me to have this educational piece and what we did.
I like that.
Yeah.
The opportunity to teach.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, I'm not doing an IPA. I'm not making an IPA. And I'm not using Chico ale yeast either. I'm going to use an English ale strain. We're going to make mostly English ales. That's what we're going to do. And then I talked to the Chuckanut guys, and they're like, well, that's fine, but be prepared that if you don't have an IPA, there's some number of people that are just going to turn around and walk out the door. And I was like, yeah, but this isn't a city. They can't go to another brewery down the street. And they're like, yeah. He's like, you'd be surprised. There'll be some that are just okay, I'm going to go someplace where I can get an IPA, even if it's not a brewery.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of torn. And, was talking to Sean and Tim, my partners, about it, and was just like, all right, fine. Like, we'll make an IPA, but it's gonna be like an English style IPA.
That's cool.
It's gonna have a bunch of Golden Promise in it. It's gonna have some Crystal Light in there. It's gonna be, fairly bitter without like a ton of hop aroma and that's what we did. And the first week of opening, everybody loved all the beers. So we opened with 6 beers. We had a Vienna lager.
Oh, lovely.
So that was the first beer we ever made here.
Oh, okay,
on the
gotcha.
system. I was like, no, we're doing Vienna lager. Like, I love Vienna lager. So Vienna lager, IPA, golden ale, stout, porter, and ESB. And
that's an eclectic lineup.
I
I really
know.
enjoy that.
And then I was like really feeling like we're opening in the middle of the summer and we have a porter and a stout. I was like, oh crap. I was like, all right, well, we're going to make like, a golden ale. That's what we're going to do. And making the golden, so this was really funny in the beginning where like Sean and Tim, my partners now that don't have anything to do with brewing, were actually helping me out back here. And nobody knows what happened, but I was looking at the mash for this golden ale and I could see roasted grain in there. And I'm like, what? I'm like, this is not going to be a golden ale. And so, probably one of the first times I was trying any brewery ninja moves, I was like, we're going to turn this into a pale.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's actually how our Corey number 9 pale got started. It was like, it was too dark to be a golden.
Oh,
and so I'm like, I'm going to turn this into an English pale. So yeah, that was really the whole idea in the beginning was we were going to be an English ale focused brewery. Our IPA was going to be an English IPA. And, I didn't have plans to do any other lager at that point except for Vienna lager.
Yeah, something that you just want to drink all the time, which
Yeah.
is how a lot of breweries start.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would do the same.
No,
Yeah.
it's like, no, this is what they should want. And
Yeah.
sometimes you got to tell them, what they should be drinking.
Yeah, exactly.
And so yeah, that's how it started. And honestly, and I had shortly after that a number of Belgian styles kind of incorporated in there. But yeah, it's just tough, the type of brewery that we are, and then you have to attend to really the feedback that you're getting. And one of the first real criticisms that I got was that the IPA didn't have enough hop aroma and flavor. And I was like, yeah, it's because I made it that way, that's the way I wanted it. But it was one of the consistent, like everybody loved every other style that I made and was just like, the IPA is a disappointment. And I'm like, okay. And so, I had to kind of give in there where, I was adding way more hops in the dry hop. And then, I think in the beginning it was just Amarillo and Centennial. And I was like, all right, we'll add some Simcoe to this.
Yeah.
And then eventually you drop the crystal malt. And then eventually, your Golden Promise is only 25% of the malt bill.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's, idealistically like what your beer lineup would be. And then there's just this, the influence of pressures over time and kind of like what they do. But to be truthful, no single style that we started with has been axed. So like every one of them still exists, though, a handful of them only for a couple of months of the year.
That's amazing.
But
that's so cool.
Yeah, no, it's been nice. I mean, even those Belgian styles, which, good luck trying to sell the Belgian style, but like, no, we still make what we call a Belgian summer ale.
Oh, nice.
That was our way of selling it, right? I mean, it's a Belgian blonde, effectively. And we make a wit, which we find that if you call it Belgian white, you sell way more than when
Right,
calling
because
it a
then people
Belgian
just
wit.
associate it with Blue Moon or Allagash. Yeah. Well, maybe not so much, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we're still able to do that. I'm actually making the IPA and a couple of hoppy styles with US 05, so it's not all. So it was London ESB, so Y Yeast 1968 was our house ale strain for like the first 4 years. We didn't touch anything that was like an American strain.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just tough because I mean ultimately you got to sell these beers, and what's really kind of frustrating is that our locals, they're so damn loyal to beer styles. So like they latch on to one and that's all they drink, and it's like, no, you got to mix it up. Like I need you guys to be buying these beers if we're going to maintain any diversity of styles here. But no, I mean, especially with like the older dudes, like they just love ESB, and to their credit, it's the reason why we still make it year round. But it's tough. We don't really sell it anywhere else. We can it once a year, and it takes them like 3 to 4 months to drink a single batch of ESB.
Yeah.
And then it's time, I'm already making another batch so that by the time that's done. But sometimes if it doesn't get consumed as much, you're dumping a couple of barrels of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's really great to see people appreciate those styles.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not easy. There's always that threat of like, okay, well, we're going to make it. And there's like a pretty good chance that, a couple of those kegs are going down the drain.
Yeah.
But
it's awesome that the community is really supportive of you. I definitely get that here in San Juan Island. I think that's something that we felt in Astoria a lot, even though they have the ability, to drive into Portland and things like that. Here it takes a little more effort to go to a city, but they were very supportive of their local businesses. And I'm glad that you brought up kind of having a nice bureau region for San Juan Island needs diversity to thrive. And also people don't realize, but also for the brewers, there are some brewers that don't mind making the same beers over and over again. That's their goal. That's what they love and makes them happy. But a lot of us, I feel like, are very creative. So it's like, we're glad you love this. I'm glad you want to drink it all year round. But I would really like to do something cool to show and teach you and show you something new that you may like. And then that may become a new thing. It's like, you don't have this. Okay, I'll take this guy instead.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is important. I mean, I think that's where most of the joy resides for me, where is like, okay, I'm going to make an American lager, and then like digging into the research, like, historically, how are these made? How are people making them today?
Yeah.
And then just, taking it from there. And then, of course, there's just so many different levers and control points and process and how you're going to, fine tune those to express what you want within this beer. And so, yeah, there's just no joy in just, pumping out Outer Island, 30 times a year.
Yeah.
I mean, there are times when I'm like, how sweet would it be to make 3 styles? And then just like totally dial in those 3 styles. But like, I don't know, the trade-off doesn't seem worth it, I mean, I still get plenty of opportunity to dial in a lot of the beers, maybe not a beer that I'm making 1 batch of per year, but there's still plenty of opportunity to and none of them, they're all works in progress. I don't think there's any beer that I would be like, absolutely never going to touch that,
Yeah, that makes sense with like your science brain too, of like changing and evolving and finding better ways and stuff. So it makes sense of what you talked about earlier as well.
Yeah,
I think it also keeps like the brain very healthy. It doesn't get it, used to, doesn't get it just in that kind of like autopilot mode. It keeps it thinking and active, which I think is super great, because I think a lot of people just are on autopilot these days, and it's okay to kind of change it up, freshen it up, and absorb and be observant a little bit more.
That just gets depressing, I mean, it's really tough for me because now I do almost none of the brewing, right? Like it's my assistant brewers. I'm throwing on extra toughs and brewing like 2 times, maybe 3 times a year. I mean, that could change quickly.
Yeah.
It's another problem with us being as small as we are, so right as the pandemic was ending, so the first 2 years I did everything. It was just me, except for, remember, my partners are kind of helping, mill in or like weigh some hops for me and stuff like that. But I'm doing all the cellaring and the brewing first 2 years. And then, first year was like 800 barrels. Second year was 1,200 barrels. So I'm doing like 1,200 barrels is just me. Too much.
Yeah,
it's just too
that's an insane workload.
Yeah, and so I was like, I need somebody else. So fortunately, a kid who grew up here, it's actually funny because he was a senior when I first started teaching, but I didn't have him in class.
Oh, okay.
But so he had gone to Davis and done like their 9-month program down there.
Oh, okay.
And so, and I knew his family, I knew him already, and so we brought him on. And so he was here for, I think, 2.5 years. So it was really tough. We had him on for like almost a year. Pandemic hits, have to lay him off, bring him back on as things kind of start to open back up again. And after, things had pretty much reopened, he's like, hey, I got offered a job down at Mirage Brewing in Seattle. And I was like, well, are you going to take it? And he's like, yeah, I'd like to. I'm like, okay, man, cool. So that was rough because then it was suddenly just me again. And at this point, we're like a 2,400 barrel brewery. And so I'm just like, oh gosh, like this is, obviously eye-opening, where I'm like, it can't be me and one other person, because if that one other person leaves, then I'm screwed. And
You're
not just
underwater.
me, but like the brewery as a whole is jeopardized, because you can't just grab a brewer, like off the street here on the island. We've got a really small and shallow,
Workforce. Yeah.
and so I was like, we got to have two. And it's really funny. Those guys are incredible. I mean, they're just killing it, like just awesome. One of them was our bartender. And, they're like, yeah, no, he's totally solid. Like, he could learn how to brew. He had no brewing experience, did have a science background. And then the other guy also has a science background, had home brewing experience, but he was distributing at the time. Or whatever.
Okay.
And I was like, hey, man, what do you think about learning how to brew? And so we need that. It's just really tough. Things are so outrageously seasonal here. So like, you get beer season, like if you want to think about like, the peak for beer season and the tourist season are effectively the same, right? So we get an immense amount of demand through June, July, August, September.
Yeah.
The off season, right, where a lot of people aren't drinking beer, it's not beer season anymore, is also the time when there's no tourists here. So we see really deep valleys through the off season and really high peaks through the summer months. And so we are so outrageously seasonal, it's really tough. We can't make enough beer through the summer, and I really struggle to keep those two guys busy through the off season.
Yeah, through the off season.
Yeah.
And you also don't want to be sitting on beer during the off season too. That's always horrible.
No, we can't have them making beer just to stay busy.
Yeah.
So yeah, our seasonality is a wicked challenge here.
Yeah.
And really difficult. And yeah, and then it's just like, so, this month of March, we started ramping things up, but we'll be full tilt by next month, making as much beer as we possibly can.
In preparation.
Yeah, because we have to build up inventory because it gets consumed so much faster than we could ever produce it.
Yeah.
Through the summer months. So it's really tough, and I don't want to lose those guys, so I'm doing everything I can to keep them busy. I mean, they've been on for almost 2 years now, so I've got a ton invested in them.
Nice.
They're just killing it. And, it was tough. Like, when I brought them on, they're like, pumps are starting to make weird noises. And I'm like, what'd you do? Did something happen?
Yeah.
Well, it's just, they don't know. So maybe they ran a pump dry for a half hour or something.
Yeah.
Like, the equipment takes a ton of beating when you're training new employees.
Oh, yeah. And
So-
especially when you're training people I'll talk about this briefly. They don't know how to listen for those sounds because they've never
Yeah.
heard them before. Whereas, I'd be in the cellar with Pauline and she'd be washing kegs, but I could hear that obviously the keg washer was
Yeah.
malfunctioning.
Yeah,
And this
yeah,
is on top of all the other noise. And she'd be like, "How'd you hear that?" And it's like, "Oh, I've just been doing this for so long." And, eventually by the time I left,
sounds.
that's where she's like, I can now start to hear and spot them. I was like, yeah. And that's honestly when somebody's talking to you and then they walk away,
Yeah.
it's because they hear something.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're going to fix it.
Yeah, so often I'll hear something, I'm like, I shouldn't be hearing that. It could just be like the sound of liquid hitting the floor,
Yeah.
but just the exact intonation, like the height that it's falling from in the region of the brewery that it's falling, I'm like, that's not right. I'll be right back,
So in tune to it, yeah.
Yeah. So we want to keep those guys. I mean, that they're just doing great, and it's a real challenge in that we're just so slow. I mean, there's only so much you can clean, only so much that you can do. So, so for that reason, I brew almost not at all because I'm trying to give them all that brewing work, and there's tons of stuff that I can do when it comes to developing new beers or trying out new processes or things like that.
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding that, I mean, the beer is fantastic. And I know that it's really tough, especially being very seasonal based can be very hard to plan for those things. And I hope though that it continues to be consistent. Obviously you guys have passion for teaching and curiosity, which I think is just a blessing here for San Juan Island and Friday Harbor. We're in an hour 42. We usually give 10 minutes.
I had one question before
you can
we
ask
do
one question.
the other question.
Yeah.
Okay, we could edit out the beginning about where I live.
No.
I don't know what else to say.
No,
about
you're totally
live.
okay.
Yeah, Connecticut, Seymour.
Yeah.
That's great. So we love to ask the question of if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self throughout any period of your lifetime, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
Yeah. So this is really cool because the other podcast that I did, his first question was, how pleased would your, 17-year-old self be with your current self? And, I said he'd be very pleased because definitely did a significant amount of partying through high school. And I thought I'm sure that if I was, thinking about what I was doing in my mid 40s, I'd be like, oh yeah, it'd be cool as shit if you were making beer. But I don't know. So in a lot of ways, I think I might be a little bit entitled, a little bit of a spoiled brat, where I'm totally, I cannot accept for a second that I would be doing something for a long time that I don't want to be doing. There are so many people that seemingly commit themselves to a profession for their entire lives, and even if they're unhappy, they're like, no, this is what I chose, this is what I'm going to do. And I could see where if you were somebody who grew up in, let's say, the Depression, right, you would, so heavily weight job security that you'd be like, no, I'm not going to jump from this job, for any reason, right? I've been here for 20 years and I've got seniority, I've got it locked up, I'll have this job till I retire. But I guess because I haven't been in that position and I've never really struggled to get employed. I've been poor as shit at times, but I knew that I wasn't going to starve or wasn't going to become homeless. And so, I always felt like, no, my happiness is the most important thing in the world. And so, I'm going to do what I need to do to try to achieve that. And so, I think that, everything that I've done to this point. So, I was a microbiologist straight out of college for a pharmaceutical company and was like, yikes, I can't do this long term. This is crazy. And then, for a long time was kind of seasonal and just cooking in different places, like in Montana and Glacier National Park. And then I did the teaching thing and now I'm doing the brewing thing. And, who knows how much longer I'll do this, but I've never accepted that whatever it is I'm doing is something that I've got to do the rest of my life. And so I think I'd be really pleased to know that, my, 17-year-old self would be looking at me now and be like, yeah, man, you got to do what it is that you think is going to make you happy. And so I feel like I've done a good job of living up to that.
Sounds like
to
it.
this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good awareness and a good creed to have.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. I know we have
Oh yeah.
some open time for you to chat about.
Yeah, like fun things that San Juan Island Brewing has coming up, whether it's festival stuff, new beers, or even if it just is like, yeah, come over to Friday Harbor and please have a pint, see the island,
See the island,
hang
all the cool
out.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So, being the size that we are, especially at this point, we're heavily reliant upon tourism, right? And off-island sales. So, really what we're hoping is that folks that discover us, whether, Pint Defiance or wherever you might find our cans at like Hagen or something like that this ultimately instigates folks to come out here, visit the brewery, and see what it's all about. We think we've developed a pretty cool space for people to come hang out. Of course, we're on gorgeous San Juan Island, so in addition to like drinking beer and eating here, there's lots of other wonderful things to do. But yeah, there is no way that we could survive solely on locals' revenue. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of a decision we made years ago,
Yeah.
and now we're committed to that. But yeah, I mean, we're going to continue to can, though canning numbers are going down. And I mean, that's a conscious choice. It's we really had to ramp that up through the pandemic, but now that we've got enough demand back for draft, we're going to focus on putting our limited amount of beer in there.
Yeah.
And so, so we're doing what we can to stay out there on the mainland. We've got a really strong presence up here. We've struggled pretty hard in Seattle. It's just a pretty competitive market. There's some big breweries down there. Like
It's also heavily saturated, which is always hard.
yeah, saturated, and just those big boys, man.
Yeah.
You got the like
They buy all the SKUs.
Fremonts and the
Yeah.
Georgetowns, and even the Rubens is the biggest that our distributor has, and it's just really tough.
Yeah.
But just as well, I mean, we'll continue fighting the fight to maintain a presence down there. But if we didn't, then we tried, and I know other places up here that beer can go to.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's just all about getting people out here and people valuing what we do. Like, I love your story about having the ESB and the porter and being like, these are just wonderful beers. And I mean, that's it's exactly what I'm hoping are what people are saying out there, because we are still getting those styles out there. And and it's cool. There's some other people getting it out there too, and hopefully some of those consumers that think that they're exclusively IPA drinkers will start venturing out. It seemed really promising that, like, with lagers for a while, that people were willing to try Pilsner because that was familiar, and maybe that leads to trying some other lager styles as well. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see where it goes, but I think you can count on us continuing to do kind of what we've been doing for almost 7 years now, and we are dedicated to offering the customer a variety of beer styles from different places around the world that are hopefully doing justice to these styles. We're buying the malt from the Czech Republic for our Czech Pilsner and our Czech dark lagers.
That's
and,
amazing.
And English malts for our English ales, and using English hops for those. And so yeah, I mean, we're trying, and we hope that people out there continue to value that and continue to purchase our beer.
Yeah.
It's true to the craft, and it shows.
Cool.
We appreciate you sitting down with us so much. This was awesome. So
Yeah,
thank you,
Thanks.
Jesse.
Thank
I appreciate
you.
it. It's a great conversation.
Yeah.